Graeme Garden now presents a tribute to the man behind Ernie, driver of the nippiest milk cart in the West.
From 1953 to 1990, he was a consistent star.
He was an absolute genius. I loved working with him. He taught me so much. He really, really did.
Generation after generation will watch Benny Hill and he will still be the funniest man in the world.
He had that lovely face, that moonbeam smile and the twinkling eyes, and you knew what was in his mind all the time, and you knew he wasn't going to get any.
Eventually, of course, the one-man band, writing the script and the lyrics and the music and everything.
Hello and welcome to There'll Never Be Another. I'm Graeme Garden and this is the third of our programmes celebrating the careers of 5 performers who had an indelible impact on British comedy. This week, the man who brought the naughty seaside postcard to life, Benny Hill.
Buenos días, señores y señoras. En 5 minutos vamos a ver todas las estatuas del París y los monumentos y quizás las chicas guapas. No sé, pero creo, ay madre mía.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren.
Benny's director at Thames Television, Dennis Kirkland.
Ben wanted to become a comedian, but his dad used to take him to the Variety Theatre in Southampton, and he saw a sort of folder rolls type show, which was like sketches, and he said there was the funny fat comic, and he was always surrounded by beautiful girls, and everybody laughed and everybody clapped for him. And he said, I want to be like him. I want lovely girls all around me and everybody clapping and laughing at me. And that's really what set him on the road to it.
Benny Hill on Desert Island Discs.
Christmas days, stood up in the corner with funny hats on, making mum, dad and aunties and uncles laugh with little impersonations of film stars and Ned Sparks and Gordon Arker and all that lot.
Benny's close friend, theatrical agent Peter Charlesworth.
He started to do bits and pieces of entertainment in the army. He'd always aspired to being a singer, which didn't work out. And when he came out of the army, it followed that he tried to turn professional.
And then he got himself into the theatre and became, as he always said, ASM and small parts. He said, I'm not an ASM anymore, but I still have the small parts. And just made his way up through that way. I mean, he had a tough time. He slept in the park, for several nights over Battersea Way, because he had so little money. And the first job he got was on tour, and he was a straight man for Reg Varney. And then one night, the other comic was ill or something not dissimilar, and Benny knew the sketch backwards, so he went on and played the sketch. And that's really how he started to make a little name for himself.
Benny had made an impact with the Nuffield Centre show, which was his first big break, before he had his own show. And he was third top of the bill, sharing the top of a variety bill.
Fellow performer Nicholas Parsons.
I worked with him first at the Nuffield Centre, which was just after the war, and they used to have a show. This was the old Nuffield Centre where they used to, during the war, the forces were entertained free. And then they used to do these programmes from the Nuffield Centre, which Benny compared, and it was for the new acts of television. And that was my very first solo spot I ever did. But Benny was the link between them. And Benny used to write all his own material, and he was a wonderful compere, kept the thing moving, because it was live, remember, and you had to watch the times and everything.
Benny's influences were never too hard to detect. Star of the Benny Hill Show, Bella Emberg.
He was like the Keystone Cops. He wrote everything himself, as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, all of them did. He would admit that he borrowed a bit from here and a bit from there. But he wove it so beautifully that it was Ben's, And I always say when people say, he used to pinch from the Keystone Cops, I said, yes, but who did they pinch from? There must have been somewhere it started. Probably in old vaudeville years ago.
Chaplin, Keaton, W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers, all of the great Hollywood comics. And also, of course, the wonderful people, the English comedians like Jimmy James and all these guys were all Benny's heroes. If you mentioned a comic's name that you just read in a book because you didn't even know who it was, he would tell you the act. And he had a great brain. He watched all the time.
He was incredibly influenced by Max Miller. He thought Max Miller, till the day he died, was one of the greatest stand-up performers of all time.
What sort of act did you do?
Anybody's, whoever I happened to see at the Palace that particular week,
Yeah.
including Max Miller often.
I went into a restaurant this afternoon. I said, I want 21 donuts and a cup of tea. The waiter said, how many? I said, 21 donuts and a cup of tea. She said, have 22, make it even number. I said, what do you think I am, a pig?
Michael Grade.
He was the television equivalent of the Seaside Postcard, really. But clever. I mean, the material, reworking old jokes into sketches and songs and so on, very, very, very clever. Very clever man.
And I went to see him because he was also doing quite a few broadcasts. Things like Workers' Playtime, Midday Music Hall, stuff like that.
For all the sauciness, Benny Hill's radio shows were already treading new territory as he played with and mocked the genre.
He loved radio. He loved doing it. He loved being in it. He had some very good people working with him. And he enjoyed it immensely.
Benny Hill fan and author of Benny Hill, The Complete Companion, Robert Ross.
When he first started in the sort of the late 40s, early 50s on radio, he would do his act that he used to do in the war, the sort of the troop show things, which was basically just ripped off Max Miller gags and a few blue jokes thrown in for good measure. But I mean, Benny Hill Time, the radio show he headlined in the early 60s, was really probably more likely cast off stuff from television.
Benny actually is different from a lot of other comedians. I mean, Eric and Ernie took a long time to reach the peak of their career, and everybody remembers us as two of the greatest performers. But it took them a long time to reach that. Benny is actually, who worked extraordinarily hard. Like any comic, they often struggle for years and work extraordinarily hard till they get the recognition they deserve. Benny didn't get his recognition and become a superstar for many, many years. But he was doing excellent work and very innovative work for many years before he became a big name.
Barry Cryer.
He was a brilliant mimic, I remember, in the old BBC days. The names of the day, like Philip Harben, the chef and everything, forgotten now, but... and, of course, playing all the characters.
Ben Elton.
I was actually known for a while as somebody who was supposed to despise Benny Hill. Not at all. I certainly was not moved by the sort of titillating obsessions of the later shows. But one of the reasons I hated it most, the fact that half the jokes were about girls in bikinis, apart from the fact that I felt that some of those stereotyping was unhelpful and unuseful, was also because it took the emphasis off the great comic. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of Benny Hill's 50s work. I mean, the work he did at the BBC. Astonishing stuff. I mean, really subtle, interesting stuff. And that still shines through with the later shows.
But radio spoofs were not Benny Hill's only form of innovative comedy.
Like when he started out as a kid doing George Raft and Jimmy Cagney impersonations, he did lots of film pastiches. So he did like Casablanca, doing both Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet and these sort of things, and Mae West and W.C. Fields. He was great at doing the doubles, and it was very pioneering television for a start to get like one performer doing 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 people in one sketch. Very much sort of like Harry Enfield and those sort of people did later on.
Films with jump cuts in them and so on. Clever ideas, yes, very clever ideas. Very clever.
He observed everything in the movies and everything, and he discovered that you could actually have him playing 3 characters by literally putting a piece of black cardboard halfway across the lens and only record one side of the tape, which they used to do on film, virtually. And he was gobsmacking on TV. Nowadays, everything's a trick. You go and watch the big movies and you don't even go, wow, because you know it's not real, which is why we used to do our lot. If somebody fell out of a window, they fell out of a window, and it was a dummy, but you knew it was a joke because they got up. And in those early days, his eyes were glued on television. He couldn't... Jukebox Jury is popular. Wouldn't it be lovely if I played everybody on Jukebox Jury? The guy who was his producer at the time said, how do you do it? And he said, I'll tell you how to do it. Because he'd studied it, not as in a university. He'd studied it, how to get him playing 3 different people at the same time. And he played everybody in that show, and it like changed that kind of world, And of course, we used to do the bad movie, with the frames missing and the voices out of sync and all of that.
We'd just done a sketch in one of the shows based on that film, which is popular then, Ted, Bob, Carol and Alice, which I and Patricia Hayes were playing 2 of the characters, which was a bizarre casting, and he and another were playing the other ones. And I sort of characterised the role I had, and I kept saying, well, I think you've got a point there. And I was doing this, and these little sort of, well, the character was getting little chuckles from the audience. And the next time we were recording the show, he kept saying, well. And it was his way of saying, I've given you the lines, do not embroider.
You know, he's got this image of up the skirt and down the cleavage and rushing about, but in those days he was doing clever things like a film with bad continuity, badly shot, and the hat disappears off the head as you walk through the door and suddenly he's sitting on the other side of the room. I loved all that stuff he did, and he did a very funny I, Claudius, I remember. And then, of course, it became a stereotype. Benny was the man who rushed about to yakety-yak music and everything, you know. But some of I was a great fan of his earlier stuff.
The show was filled with different characters. I mean, if you just take one of the shows now and look at it, you'd be staggered at how many different kinds of comedy there's in there. There's a funny song, there's a silent film, there's a sketch, there's a Mickey take of something, there's a load of singing quickies, and you go down through the show, and there's every kind of humour that you could possibly want, all within 1 hour. And I'm sure that the difference between people like lovely Paul Whitehouse and Enfield and people like that is that these days, to the great disappointment of a lot of us, they get a great character that you love and they throw it away after a series. In Benny's time, great characters like Chinaman, like Fred Scuttle, people that we loved and the viewers loved, stayed forever.
It's the other thing about variety clowns, you get one character and you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. I mean, Richard Hearn doing Mr. Pastry, that's it, that's what you're known for, so your audience love you for that, so how can you let them down, sort of thing, you know.
Fred Scuttle was going to be a northern cornet player, and he said to me, I've got to learn to play the cornet. I said, you Potter, you're 35 years old, you can't read music, and you're going to learn to play the cornet. He said, I've got this wonderful character. And he said, who is the best known cornet player? And Harry Mortimer gave him lessons on the cornet, and within 2 months he was playing the cornet very passably to go along with Fred Scuttle. Eventually, when he went on television with it, he realised he didn't need the cornet and he dropped it.
Fred Scuttle's always a failure. He owns a newspaper, he's a rocket scientist the next, and he's an idiot. And he believes that they're going to be big success in the escort agency business. Toddy's saying things like, in this flowery thing shirt, and he's saying, I feel like a woman, and Ben says, well, so do I, but wait till the end of the show. You know, and that kind of thing. It's idiocy, see, with great faces. He always had a thing that all good comics do, like the Keatons and everybody. If you have great faces standing next to you, you're going to get a smile. It's another score, another point towards the joke that you're doing.
And then, of course, there were the songs.
You could hear the hoofbeats pound as they raced across the ground, and the clatter of the wheels as they spun round and round. And he galloped into Market Street, his badge upon his chest. His name was Ernie, and he drove the fastest milk cart in the West.
Ernie the Milkman got into the charts, didn't it? Fastest milkman in the West. Comedy records seem to have disappeared now. They don't figure largely. It's all the video of the stage show and everything now, isn't it? It's not the comic record.
They called him Ernie. And he drove the fastest milk cart in the West.
I was in the show when we first did it, and I remember saying to Benny, I said, Benny, that's terribly catchy, and it said it's a wonderful lyric as well. I said, surely you could take that further. He said, well, I had thought about it. I said, yeah, but pursue it.
She says, Ernie, I'll be happy if it comes up to me chest. That tickled old Ernie. And he drove the fastest milk cart in the West.
Oh, they're very clever, very clever. I mean, Ernie was the classic one, isn't it? Brilliant. I mean, I've got an LP of his and all the little songs, you know, that he wrote himself, and the wonderful ditties.
He used to play the worst guitar in the world, as old Ronnie Ulrich will tell you, and he would sing it into a terrible little cassette. But he was very clever. He would also say, no, I want that and that and that. That's not quite how I saw it. And I don't think he could read music, particularly, but then possibly now they could let Lennon McCartney, and they didn't do too bad.
He was recording stuff from the early 50s, really. But you're talking like the Piccolo song and those sort of things, and in the 60s. You play the records today, they sound really fresh, and obviously they're funny because they're full of Benny's sort of innuendo jokes, but they're well-written songs, you know.
He was self-taught completely. He played 4 or 5 instruments quite well. He used the instrument as a prop, and he learnt to play them because, first of all, he had a great penchant for South American music, for Latin American music, the Los Paraguayos field of things. And so when he wanted to learn that, and he wanted it when he became very big, what did he do? He invited Los Paraguayos onto the show. The sole purpose of that was, first of all, to have them as an act, to do a number, but to teach him genuine Latin American and South American gaucho music correctly.
And they were all sort of like pastiches of other stars, so he did like Rolling Stones numbers and the Bob Dylan one, What a World. I love that. And it's like, he had this ear to mimic the genres of popular music and make them funny, but also make them sound good.
One of my very favourites, and I actually quoted it, I think, at the thing, was a Dylan Mickey take, because we love Bob Dylan. And, I mean, we genuinely love Bob Dylan, but we couldn't believe, how many roads must a man walk down before I call him a man? And we said, this isn't no singer, but oh my word, is Dylan the greatest,
With great success came the opportunity to travel.
Once Benny became really and truly successful, he said, no, I will do 4 shows a year. He took the money he was earning and just travelled the world, sometimes incognito. His agent didn't know half the time where he was. It wasn't nervousness, it was just that he felt he didn't need to. In that sense, he was in many ways the most mature comedian I've ever worked with.
Benny's travelling is the reason for 99.75% of the comedy. Our shows were filled with Spanish waiters, French waiters, or whatever, everything. Wherever he went, he would. It doesn't matter what the jokes were. The jokes can be as British, but it would be that the hotel's Splendide or something. So you knew he was in France, and all that nice music that went with it. And he used to always say, we'd be standing in a field like in Thorpe Park with a huge crew and caravans and everything, and it's bucketing down with rain. And he'd say, I was sitting at a bar in Marseille when I wrote this little gag, and I've sent it off to you, and I never think that in a couple of months' time, there'll be 70 people standing in a field with cameras and lights and sets, because I wrote a little gag, having had a lovely lunch in the middle of Cannes or somewhere. So his travel affected everything he wrote, which is why and of course, he adores Europe, you see. He loves the French music and the Spanish music and the gypsy music of the hills and Polish music and the Greek music, all of which we did. Every show had a complete flavour of Europe in it because he loved it so much.
While he was in Germany, in the army, he learnt to speak fluent German. He spoke fluent French, fluent German, very good Spanish, and some Italian, all completely self-taught. Some of it learnt from 78 records that he bought in a second-hand shop for about £1. He went all over Europe picking up this material. He went to every tiny cabaret, circuses, bullfights, everything where there was entertainment. He spent months cruising around every conceivable place to pick up ideas.
Obviously, he was very good because he used to go on holiday, Italy, Spain, places like that. And I suppose he was good with the natives.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. In 5 Minuten, wir beginnen unsere ganze kleine Tour auf Paris. Wir sehen all den Statuen und all das Monumenten. Und vielleicht das ganze schöne Frau in das Cabaret. Mit der kleinen Kurse mit der großen Busen. Ja, mit ein ganz kleines Stück Striptease. Der Busenhalter. Und der Kamipanzer. So, das ist sehr gut.
Hello, everyone. In a very few minutes, we're going to start a little tour of Paris and see all the sights. I'm receiving great pleasure that you have come to see us, to go around Paris. And evidently, you're going to see all the monuments. And maybe we finish up in the Pigalle. And we see the cabarets with the beautiful and naked women. Ça marche, yeah? It's very good. And if you have any question to ask me, don't be afraid to ask, because as you can see, I speak very well all the languages.
Not everyone found these kind of routines funny, and some claimed comedy at the expense of foreigners was racist. Yet, outside Great Britain, Benny Hill was even more popular than at home, and his worldwide appeal never faltered.
You have to say that the visual side of the show is as funny in Japan as it is in Iceland, as it is in Argentina, as it is in Russia, as it is in Australia. You see, comedy's all based on failure. So if he tries to chat a girl up and gets it wrong, then anybody in the world has, in the middle of the jungle, they've tried to chat the pretty girl up and tripped over the log or poured the wine down her dress or whatever. So those kind of jokes they're international.
Elizabeth Berriere of the French TV station TV3.
For us, the French people, he's like Charlie Chaplin, but on television. At the same time, he can be like a father, a brother, a lover, or a man, just a man. And he is very funny, even when he is sometimes a bit vulgar. He knows when he must stop.
He had this, and still has, this incredible following throughout the world. His shows are still shown in nearly every country in the world. I mean, I was getting little repeat fees coming in from, Afghanistan and Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka and, the Lebanon and all kinds of places, because he goes everywhere.
I went to Poland a year ago, and the most amazing thing happened. When I got off the plane, on the runway, there were 2 little 5-piece bands playing for me because I was the director of the show. That's how powerful it is today in Spain and and all over the world. And in France, of course, they virtually knighted him.
He's the biggest comedy star the world's ever known. There's no getting away from that. So the fact is, it makes people laugh, and if it makes people laugh, that's good enough for me.
Yes, that's very strange, because I know lots of comedians over the years have wanted to make it big in the States. And I remember I'd finished working with Ben then, and I was doing something else at Thames Television some years later. And he was in the studio recording on a Sunday, which is unusual in those days for him to work on the Sundays. And I went into the studio to him. He said, "Hello, dear heart, how are you?" And he said, I think we're going to they're going to try to sell some of the shows to America. He said, "I don't think we get too much after everybody's taken their cut." And he was very matter of fact. And he is the one that was the biggest thing for years, after Stan Laurel perhaps, or Charlie Chaplin.
Michael Hill is the TV critic at the Washington Post.
I think that Benny Hill was one of America's guilty pleasures. We have the bawdiness of it. It's a little bit like I don't think you tell too many people the next morning if you've been out to a peep show the night before. He certainly was not politically correct, but he did, though, really strike a chord among a lot of viewers.
It is forever. The Yanks say it's forever, and they know their telly.
Racist or not, a far bigger criticism was just around the corner. David Baddiel.
You couldn't make jokes that used vocabulary like, say, puff. You couldn't really talk about women if you were a man, and you couldn't talk about, ethnic minorities.
His humour, which was traditional British humour, based in the old variety format, what I would describe as good, honest vulgarity to some extent. But suddenly the politically correct brigade were taking over, and they saw something very incorrect about him always chasing pretty girls.
I think what's wobbly about it, let me put this, you see, I'm a big Carry On fan. I mean, not always, some of it was rubbish, but a lot of it was fabulous, life-enhancing stuff, really great, exuberant comedy. On occasion, Benny Hill was. But the difference was that in Carry On, the women are funny too. Brilliant comedians. Joan Sims, Barbara Windsor, Hattie Jakes, great, wonderful, exuberant characters, every bit as sexually interesting, every bit as predatory, every bit as pompous, and indeed every bit as sad. Sid's trying to get off with Joan Sims, Charles Hawtrey, wondering whether what his sexuality was. We never really worked out. A great mishmash of ill-shapen bodies and ill-shapen paranoias and egos. That was the wonderful mix of Carry On. Whereas in Benny Hill, the women tended to be entirely decorative, entirely the butt of the comedy. And I think in the long run, it's pointless to analyse these things over much, and you sound pompous when you do. But when asked, I've made that simple point. And people have sometimes said, will you like Carry On? And that's why.
Harriet Wistrick of the London Women's Centre.
I think Benny Hill is actually one of the archetypal examples of a sexist comedian, a leering, leching man chasing after scantily clad women, wanting them for sexual gratification. They're running away from him. The reality of many women's lives is that they actually live in fear of sexual violence and rape from men, and it's not a laughing matter.
But Benny Hill stood firm and defended his work until the end, brushing off the words of his critics.
For example, a very pretty girl walks down the street. A man on the other side of the road says, oh, she's nice, into a lamppost. He's the one who's hurt. He's the one who loses his dignity. She walks straight on.
And even now there are many people prepared to defend Benny's corner.
I don't believe they were sexist. I know people say they are, but with all the little girls in their bikinis and everything. I'm lucky being the old frump who was had lots of clothes on. And we used to... It was always filmed in September. It was getting quite cold in September. All these lovely ladies with bikinis on. But if you look, you'll find that they are chasing Ben. He's not chasing them. They are chasing him. I don't think people realise just how great he was. You get the alternative comics, who I don't really care for. I don't think you need to say 4 letters to say a joke. Ben was slapstick. He was broad comedy. It was for the family. Well, there were sly innuendos, and he says, is it my fault they take it that way? The twinkle in his eye.
I don't think there was anything sexist about any of Benny's shows, radio or television. What I think people misread was the fact that the girls were scantily clothed and always in alluring positions, which is what Benny traded on. There's one absolutely brilliant sketch which several very famous American comedians have it in their archives, where he is in an office counting receipts, and he's got a huge mound of paperwork, and he's on the last thing, and he goes 1,109, 1,110, 1,111, and a girl comes and stoops down to a filing cabinet, exposing her knickers, and he stops counting, and she just pulls something out the file and gives him a quick dirty look and walks away. Not a word is spoken, and he goes 1, 2, 3. Now that sounds like a very simple gag, but the timing he involved in that and the thought, and I know a lot of comics have remarked about that.
We got the Hills Angels idea, which became world famous, from taking the Mickey at the Kenny Everett show and his dancers. You know, they had a hot gossip and everything. And we thought, well, we've got to do Kenny. We'll do Mickey out of Kenny, but we'll do a very, very bad sexy route, because they were doing the most outrageous things at 7 o'clock at night on the Everett show. So we did a Mickey take on this, and it worked so well that we said, hey, this is funny. This is a bit of dance and a little visual gag. And the next thing you know, it developed into about a good third of the show, and very, very good it was too. Nice, pretty girls, very, very silly comedy. Really, all part of the whole routine. And that was done by his eyes being on somebody else's show.
Benny's comedy was comedy of sexual frustration, as is the carry-ons and that sort of stuff. And the point is, the women always get the upper hand. It's the men that get hit over the head with planks of wood and fall down manholes and this sort of stuff when they're ogling some girl in a short skirt. It's a woman who's just walking past, she's minding her own business. It's the men that are gibbering idiots when they see a bit of bare flesh, and that's funny. That's funny. Benny said he can get his face slapped in 6 different languages, and that's funny. I mean, this guy was just summing up the human condition of the battle of the sexes and always losing, and I'm afraid men always do. If you look at stuff like more high-profile comedy, like, for example, Spike Milligan's Q shows or Monty Python, they've all got scantily clad girls in as well. Carol Cleveland, Julia Breck, getting her bra and panties out, but it's intellectually more acceptable than Benny Hill was.
So was the Benny Hill show sexist?
It is the most sexist show I've ever known in my life, because it is totally and utterly anti-men. Jackie, Toddy, Benny, Henry, John, I mean, the boys are back in town, aren't they? And they're all chatting up the girls, and they all fail on the Benny Hill show. And the women always win, and the men always lose. And that, if that isn't sexist, I don't know what is, because it is totally anti-men, and anybody who has missed that has missed 99.75% of the show.
Sexist or not, the claims clearly had an impact, and Benny Hill was dismissed by Thames Television in a 2-minute meeting. He was never the same man again.
News of Benny Hill's death, so soon after that of Frankie Howard, has saddened colleagues like Ernie Wise, who relished his deliberate naughtiness.
Mrs. Cheeky humour, and he was our most successful comedian. I don't think anybody has been more successful than Benny Hill. I liked his visual humour. He had the most original visual comedy. I think that was his outstanding talent. He was really a Chaplinish sort of clown, and then of course he had his cheekiness.
I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. And it's very sad because when you know someone very well from working with them, you see some of the inner workings within their temperament. And I feel very sad at his end, because he did die a very sad man.
I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. It was over in Easter. Went to see Leslie Joseph in a play at Wimbledon. And before we left home, we'd heard that Frankie Howard had died. And we went to see Leslie, and we had a drink in the bar, and we got home, and I went upstairs. Now, I'm a great one for CFAX, to see the cricket scores and everything like this. And I saw it, and I said to my secretary, I'm not seeing this, am I? And she came upstairs. I said, I'm not seeing it, am I? She said, yes, you are. That Ben had gone. Incredible. Just like that.
I was once on a bus going up Ken High Street with him, and he was a massive name. But he was this tubby man with glasses and a hat on, and he had a Sainsbury's bag. And we went up Kensington High Street in this bus. Nobody noticed him. And whether this was the key to anonymity to go on a bus, or whether he thought, why would I bother with a taxi when there's a bus goes up Ken High Street, is absolutely fascinating. Nobody looked at him. They didn't. The glasses and the hat did it, I think, you know.
Bonjour. There are those that say, oh, he's a recluse. They should see me reclusing in the south of France at the Palm Beach Casino with the lovely dancers down there.
Despite his fall from favour, 8 years after his death, his greatness still lives on. Richard Dunn of Thames Television.
A genius for writing, for observing. He went everywhere armed with notebooks to record his observations of people's behaviour.
Benny Hill will be rediscovered, every 10 years, and his TV shows will run, and people say, oh my God, wasn't he funny, wasn't it brilliant? And that will happen every so often. I think he'll be rediscovered and reevaluated in that way. There's no doubt that he is part of television legend, no question.
I think Ben was one of the greatest. I really do. I think he's the greatest. But, let's say he's one of the greatest.
It'll go on. It'll go on forever. This is real. This is entertainment. The subject matter is such that it can't age. Man and woman. It's the man-woman conflict, isn't it? And the conflict of man against the establishment. That was his basis of all his comedy, with his own mind applied to it.
Sat at Chaplin's desk and he cried because he couldn't believe he was sitting in God's chair, as it were. That's what he was saying. But Chaplin had a row on his shelf by his TV in Vevey of Benny Hill shows, and it was like if Chaplin thinks he's the greatest, and Chaplin and Keaton are forever, then Benny's forever.
Which meal would kill me, but the Andalusian gypsies have a saying so old but so true, that for every man there's a woman, and my darling, I've chosen you.
On There'll Never Be Another, Benny Hill, you heard David Baddiel, Peter Charlesworth, Barry Cryer, Richard Dunn, Ben Elton, Bella Emberg, Michael Braid, Michael Hill, Dennis Kirkland, Nicholas Parsons, Robert Ross and Harriet Wistrick. The series producer was Mario Stylianides, and the producer was Ashley Blaker.
But the Andalusian gypsies have a saying so old but so true, that for every man there's a woman, and I had to get lumbered with you.